Everyone, welcome to another Cypress webinar. The title of this webinar is Covering Your Code with End-to-End Testing. And I wanted this webinar for a long time because we love code coverage. And this is really special webinar because we actually have a professional joining us. Tom Hu, yes.
Wow, such flattery, Gleb.
I think it's well deserved. Once you see the slides, we have 84 slides to cover today. It's excellent material. Tom, you're from Codecov. How long have you worked there?
Yes, I've been at Codecov just under a year. It's been super exciting. Before that, I was an engineer for a long time, and so we've been also wanting to do this webinar with Cypress for such a long time. And as Gleb says, it's going to be fantastic. I can't wait.
Thank you for joining. I'm Gleb Bahmutov. I recently switched from VP of Engineering to just being Distinguished Engineer. So I can only imagine my next title. A little bit of housekeeping. We will use Slido as always these days to answer your questions. So go to Slido, sli.do or slido.com and enter the event code Codecov. And when you'll find the event, you'll be able to take part in our polls and ask your question or upvote other people's questions. The slides are public, you can see them. Let's start. And I want to start by kind of describing our agenda. We'll briefly describe the application we're about to test and how we start with code coverage. And then we'll talk about day-to-day code coverage workflow for real-world application. And we'll see how quickly we can increase code coverage. And once we increase it to 90-something%, you will see that we'll hunt for those remaining last percent, like last line, very last line to get to 100%. You will see that at each step, there is something special that you can do and that you can use code coverage for. And then we'll answer your questions. So that you can ask at Codecov. Not Code. At Slido using Codecov event. It's just the name, right?
You can try to use Codecov. It might be challenging. You might get there and get like, oh.
Okay, let's start with Slido right away. If you go to Slido and you enter the event code, we have a poll question to our audience. Do you use the code coverage from tests today? And I think this will allow us to kind of, maybe target whatever we're speaking today a little bit better. Tom, do the answers surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, having been at Codecov for so long and an engineer, I'm always a proponent of writing really great tests and having good code coverage. And so I think this will be a really great webinar to sort of talk about those things and where to go from if you're just starting out and you have no idea where to go next, or of course you're at that like top 90, 95, 99 percentile, and you just want to get that last little bit of coverage on your tests.
Yes, I'm a little bit surprised because I assume many people, more than 40% uses code coverage, but this is great. I think we'll show the benefits of code coverage so that it will convince you to give it a try and maybe start using it. So I'm going to move on because we have a lot of stuff to cover. And I'll just briefly say, but this is our second code coverage webinar. We're not going to go into like the basics, right? You can watch our previous code coverage webinar we've done at Cypress from last year. You can read our guide if you're just starting to trying to see what it's about. So instead, let's dive in. At Cypress, we have what we call a real-world application. It's a real-world app. It's a financial application that we've written from scratch. It shows all the best practices for testing an application. The application is pretty complex. You have to log in. You can see your transactions. You can open bank accounts. You can transfer funds from one person to another. It has desktop views and mobile views. And the full repo is available. Take a look. It's a good Cypress use case. For this webinar, I actually forked it so I could show code coverage from scratch. So the first thing I wanted to do, the main thing that any financial application has to do is make sure you can log in. And if you don't have a login, it redirects you back to the login. So you can see if I'm running application and I go to /personal, it redirects me to sign in. Great. So in Cypress, this test is pretty easy. You see the database, you visit /personal URL, and then you make sure that it redirects you to /sign in. So the test runs. passes, it will run again on a loop. So it works, right? And the question immediately that comes to my mind is like, what did we just test? Are we done? Is it the whole application has been thoroughly tested? It's hard to say what we tested. We know the name of a story we tested, but what about our code? All right, like what part of our code, what specific lines and specific source files we just covered with our test? So in order for us to answer that question, we have to instrument the code so we know which lines we will cover. We have to run the test, and then we have to look at the report. So 3 parts to this question. So instrumenting an application, it depends on your application. In this case, it's React script. So we have a little plugin, but you can just insert a new command when you start the app, and it will instrument the code on the fly. We have a lot of examples showing how to instrument different apps. So find something that looks like your app, uses the same technology, the same JavaScript pipeline, and instrument it. And then here's what you will see. If you open your application, you open the DevTools. Under the window object will be window __ coverage. And there, for each source file, right, there'll be information about what source lines in that file were covered. There'll be an object called B for branches, functions, F, statements, and for each statement, function, branch will be a counter. And every time you run through that function, for example, that counter will be instrumented. Okay, so we have a coverage. We'll run the tests. Now we have to report, right? We have to extract that object, save it on disk, merge it if we run multiple tests, and then produce the report. So we've written a plugin for this for Cypress. You install it, add it to your plugins file, add it to your support file, and this is what you will see. It's pretty much the same test, but you will see additional messages from our plugin saying, I'm merging code coverage, I'm creating a report. And if you click on the report command, it will actually print the folder where to find the report. Okay, great. We can open the report. We generate it in several formats. The most important for me as a human being is HTML report, right? It's just a static page. I can open it on my computer. And this is what it will show. It will show folders, and it will show individual source files. And for each, it will tell how much we covered with that one test. And if we go into the file, it shows source code, and it shows in green statements we covered, in red the statements we didn't cover, right? Just that one test, and we get this report, so we know what we have covered. And if we look at all the files, right, we can see that on the top, we covered 21% of all total statements, 3% of the branches, only 5% of functions, and so on. We didn't cover much because we only ran like one simple test. The report is color-coded, and I apologize if those colors are not, don't show up the same. But basically, red means low coverage, yellow medium, and green files with high coverage. Now, Tom, I had a question for you. You have a lot of experience with people kind of sending code coverage reports, right?
Yeah.
What do you go for, right? Do you go for like breadth, right? Do you eliminate all red before you go for green? Or do you kind of drill down in particular file and make sure it's green before moving to the next file and making sure that's green? What do you think?
Yeah, well, so actually, it always depends on what the project is actually doing. Yeah. We had talked about, oh, this is a financial application. So there are certain parts that are probably going to matter a little bit more to a user. In that case, it would be a bank transaction, for example, or, anything that has sensitive data. So our recommendation is always you as a developer know what those critical paths are. And those are the things that you should hit up first. Now, of course, coverage is usually done from a file-like perspective in this case. So it's tough to say, oh, like this is exactly the model or this is the class that you should be focusing on. But instead, really focus on the features that are most impactful to your users because of its sensitivity. And that's where you should start first. So I guess it really is kind of going depth instead of breadth first.
Gotcha. Well, let's see what we do, right? Like many organizations have a limit or like lower limit for code coverage, right? Like let's say 90%, whatever. it can be arbitrary. We cannot set that hard limit because right now we're only covering 21%.
Oh, no.
Right? So we'll break right away. I have a question to my audience. While Tom gives us his perspective, what is the minimum at your organization, right? 20 to 40, 40 to 60, and so on, right? Or do you go for 100% all the time? Tom, what do you think we should do?
Yeah, so I think with it obviously depends like where you are as an organization are starting with your code coverage. So if you're starting at 21%, then going for that 91% isn't always the best idea.
Right.
Instead, your goal should be more to like, hey, like how can we increase this little by little so we get to something that's really high? Because inevitably you want to aim for high coverage, whatever that ends up looking like. If I were to start with a really fresh organization that had never done code coverage before, I'd say, hey, like, see where it is right now, and then maybe add 10 percentage points to that. And that's what should be your first goal. But if it's an organization that's been using coverage for a really long time, they're 100%, they kind of know what they're doing. And it's like, hey, let's just make sure we maintain that level as opposed to letting it drop down.
Hey, I only aim for 150, right? But that's just me. Like,
it's 150 or nothing.
Exactly.
Die trying.
It's not worth, right? Well, 4% of our participants picked
really
100%.
High coverage. Wow.
Right? Like have every line, every statement, every function
That's
covered.
Incredible.
Okay. Let's see what we can do for our application. I would say don't concentrate on a number, especially at the beginning, right? Because you're not going to reach 90% on a single pull request, single day. Instead,
unless you're Gleb, of course.
Well, thank you, because I don't code, right? Like 100% of zero is set up a system for long-term improvement, meaning no matter where you start, every pull request should either preserve code coverage. Let's say you refactor code, you keep the same code coverage, or if you add the pull request, it should increase it, right? If you're adding more tests, right? And this way, it always kind of like this mountain slope, it always goes up. And you can start at 20%, but you will quickly reach, whatever number you think is a target, 80, 90, 100. The only problem here that I see, it's kind of an increment. You have to compare it to something, right? How do you know if pull request is, increasing code coverage or decreasing? You have to look at what was before. So how do you know what was before? Did you cover more lines? Did you cover different lines? So if I were setting up a system for improving code coverage, I would need a place for everyone on a team to see those HTML reports, right? Not just on my local machine. I would need a place to store the numbers so we can discuss it, we can track the progress, we can compare the code coverage reports, and then a mechanism to actually say, no, your pull request drops the code coverage, I don't want to accept it, right? So which brings me to code coverage as a service, right? You can set it up yourself, but that costs time and requires maintenance. So why not pay someone like Codecov, right? Am I right, Tom? That's a justification, isn't it?
Exactly. Those two things are really the core functionality of what Codecov, is trying to solve. So Codecov is just a dedicated code coverage tool that stores your coverage reports and makes it really easy to see the results of any code change that you make. We're dedicated to being free for open source projects now and forever. And no matter what language or framework you use, so if it's just JavaScript, Node, Python, or Go on the back end, Codecov will merge those reports seamlessly and display them to the developers in the easiest way possible, which would be right in the developer workflow.
I think it was very nice because you don't want to set up different tools for keeping track of code coverage yourself if you have JavaScript front end and let's say like Go backend, right? It's just way too much effort. So right now I have a test. I can run it on CI, right? I'm generating that report that I've shown, so I can store it on Circle CI, for example, and using Circle CI interface, I can see the numbers. I can even open that HTML report, but it doesn't look very, very good, right? Like CI is not meant for showing code coverage reports and tracking the numbers. I mean, it works, right? But it's just not a good user interface, at least doesn't seem to me. So what can we do instead? So I'm running Circle CI in this case. I'm using the Codecov orb, which is like a little piece of Circle CI code that I can just import and say, upload my report that's generated by my plugin, and that's it. Like this, what, 3-line addition to my Circle config file, and I get, the things working on Codecov. And because real world app is a public repo, I never had to pay anything, right? So thank you for that. So we'll talk about the charts and the numbers, but I want to ask you, is it difficult to set up on other CI providers? And you have this claim, which I think is pretty strong. Can you kind of explain what people have to do on other CI providers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a couple of uploaders, and the one that you're presenting is our Circle CI orb. But if you use another CI like Jenkins or Travis or GitHub Actions, you can use the Bash uploader to upload coverage reports. Pretty much one line of code in your CI in order to get up and running.
It's really nice. It's really nice. I love like grabbing the badge from your service and just adding it to my markdown so everyone can see it, and you can see 20% is red. And I think it stays red up until 50% by default. Okay, so the same report, I can show each file on Codecov. You can see it's pretty much the same color scheme: green for covered lines, red for uncovered. You can see I'm missing things in this file. So now as a team, we can see the number, we can drill down, we can understand what we haven't covered yet. The one thing that I really enjoy using are GitHub apps. In this case, Codecov GitHub application. If I install in my repository, every pull request will have a status check submitted by Codecov, and we'll see an example. But this prevents me from merging a pull request that decreases code coverage, for example, right? Or is missing code coverage at all. And I used in this presentation just all the default settings, but you can tweak them, right, Tom?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different default settings that we have. What I'm showing you right now is just an example of a potential Codecov YAML file. And so this can be placed in the root of your repository. Gleb, I think I didn't actually get screen share from you, so we can do next or whatnot. But basically, the first section at the very top where it says Codecov, hey, there we go. Did it work? Oh no! Oh.
1 second, I think it just opened another tab.
I clicked another tab. So sorry.
You just want to go back to.
I was just really excited to show you our documentation.
Okay. I
okay,
think we are back.
Okay, let's see.
Okay.
Oh, okay, perfect, great. So the first section here, the Codecov requires CI to pass. Basically says whether or not we should wait for all of the status checks on your pull request to respond before Codecov posts our status check. And this is just a really good way to make sure that all of your reports have been uploaded, but you can always set this to false or to no, but by default it is set to true. Yeah. Now, the more interesting section is this here. So this is the status section, and basically this will dictate whether or not to pass or fail a particular pull request based on the configuration that you have below. So in this particular section of it, this is project coverage. Now, project coverage is the coverage over the entire code base. So in this section of the config, we have the target set to auto. And this means that any pull request has to maintain or increase total coverage, which is basically the point that we're trying to make, is that we're always trying to get a little bit better than we were before. Now, one thing to see is that we set this thing called threshold to 1%. And this actually gives you a little bit of allowance for dropping code coverage by exactly 1%. Now, having the small threshold value is actually useful for PRs that actually delete a lot of code, because deleting a lot of code will actually lower your overall coverage. Now, the patch section, patch coverage, measures the coverage for only the lines that are changing in a pull request. So only the lines of code that you have written. Here we see that we set it to 80%. And that basically means that any code that you're writing that's new in a PR has to at least be tested by 80%. So if you're writing a new feature, it basically makes sure that you have enough tests on that new feature. Now, of course, in Gleb's case, that would be set to 100%, but you can set it to
at least 100%.
if not 150%, right? Okay, so in the Slack section, and also along with the image that you see to the right, Codecov also has a comment on all pull requests. And so we have the status and we also have this comment. And this basically helps developers and other code reviewers to see the changes in their coverage for a change. So using the configuration file, you can specify a custom layout that focuses on what's most important to you. Now here, this is what the default looks like. So you'll see the reach graph on top. Afterwards, you'll see the diff of all the files. Then you'll have the flags, which we'll talk about later in the webinar. You have the files and how they were impacted. And finally, just the footer. But as I mentioned, if you want to see a little bit more, a little bit less, you can always configure that in that comment section there below.
Great. And so what we can do next, we know that we are 25%. And we know initial set of features that Tom said is important is being able to sign up and log in. Like otherwise, there's nothing anyone can do outside. So we'll just write tests. And you can kind of see the features we are testing from the names of the tests, right? Login, sign up, all the things are pretty self-explanatory. I apologize for my browser. It seems like to take its time. 1 second.
It's because I clicked that link. That's probably why.
Probably.
It needed better code coverage.
But here's those tests running in Cypress, right? And let's see, it's loading. Let's see if it plays. Let me start playing it, right? You can see the test executing, signing up a user, logging in, logging out, like the basics. If those tests are broken, then everything is broken. And thus, I write those tests first. Now, once these tests are submitted as a pull request, all right, I open the pull request, the tests run, and I get code coverage comment, right? Just like you described. And I see new files increase in code coverage percentage. And I see also additional status checks telling me that this pull request will increase the code coverage by almost 37%, right, to 56%. So I know everything's good. Tests are passing, code coverage is increasing. Great. And then I can look at what we have covered. And here's the sunburst chart that's displayed on Codecov. And in the middle, it shows in a big circle is like the top folder name, and then you go to subfolders and then to individual files. You also have a table with the coverage numbers. So if I accidentally disable a test, that's fine, right? Then the code coverage number will decrease, and Codecov will say, no, here's where you decreased. The code coverage dropped. You don't merge this pull request unless you say, okay, it's fine. I'll merge it for now. So I would say don't look at the report just yet. If you're starting, just look at the features that you want to test and write those end-to-end tests. And so what's my next set of tests? Bank accounts. I want to create a bank account, maybe edit, and so on. Delete one. Well, it increases the code coverage by almost 4%. And so I can write different set of tests, for example, for transactions, make sure they pass, make sure they increase the code coverage, merge them. And so all those features, each one increases the code coverage, all right? The interesting one is the user search. It did not increase code coverage. It means that feature, that code was tested by some other tests already, right? I just wrote explicit tests for that particular feature. But you can see that we very quickly, without really looking at the report and like hunting for edge cases, we increase the code coverage to 97%. And of course, this is kind of like a weird case because we had the app written already. So now we just kept adding tests. Of course, it increases a lot, but still, it was very quick increase. The one thing that after a while you will see is that when you run those tests on a single machine, it kind of takes a while, right? So, I mean, this is less than 2 minutes, so it's not that big of a difference, right? But at some point, you will reach a CI state where it takes 5-10 minutes. In that case, you will start using parallelization, right? Executing tests on multiple machines. And so each machine, in this case, the Cypress run, will be 2 machines splitting the number of specs. If you merge the results yourself, it will be kind of hard because machine 1 has part of a code coverage, the second machine has other spec files, so you have to somehow merge with the 2, right? But look at the pull request. Codecov says it remained the same, right? So Codecov knows the environment variables. It knows these 2 machines were part of the same CI run, and it's been able to merge the 2 partial code coverage objects into a single number, so you don't have to think about it, right? So we reached 97%. Good enough. No, we have 3% to hunt, right? So we'll look at the sunburst chart, right? We kind of go down to the red. We'll look at the file report, and now we are looking at individual source lines, and we're trying to kind of trace back and understand why those source lines were not covered. So I can look at those lines and I was like, okay, where are they coming from? Well, get charge amount function that's not covered. Well, it comes from the database in the backend folder. Wait a minute. I forgot our app has both backend code and front-end code. And so far, we completely ignore the backend, right? We only instrumented and got report for the front end. So we have to do something. Well, our application is written in TypeScript, could be JavaScript. So in order for us to get code coverage, we can install a utility called NYC. And then instead of just starting node in the backend folder, we can say NYC node backend, and it will instrument all the source files on the fly in our server. And then we can expose it as an endpoint. And we'll just tell our code coverage Cypress plugin where to grab the backend code coverage from. And so the code coverage will be grabbed automatically. So our plugin grabs the front end, grabs the backend code coverage, and combines them into a single report. So you don't have to think about 2 separate things. OK, so I'll open a pull request with this change. And I see that I actually dropped the code coverage by 1.7%. Yes, it looks bad, but when we see at, well, wait a minute, there's a whole new section of source code that we just covered, right? We can see Codecov showing like, hey, the backend is a new folder, right? You covered by quite significant margin. You actually covered the file that we originally wanted to cover, right? That had those missing lines. And here's where Tom can explain the flags, right?
Absolutely. So, we just talked about how to cover how to have coverage on our back end and our front end. And let's say, maybe your repository is a little bit more complicated, and maybe your front end team has been using code coverage for a really long time, and your back end team is just getting started. And so adding in their coverage reports, kind of like what we just saw, can lower the overall coverage of the project. Or maybe you're just getting started with unit testing, but already have end-to-end testing with Cypress. So if that's the case, Codecov offers flags. And that's basically a way to keep your coverage separated based on the coverage reports. And so this really helps to make sure that you can keep track of different functions and features of your product with meaningful coverage numbers. So how do we actually make these changes in our application? So, oh, that's my face. First, we have to update the Circle CI configuration. And basically, I just need to send this extra parameter called flag wherever I'm reporting coverage. So here, I'm just adding that parameter to the report coverage command that's being used elsewhere in this configuration file. And now I want to add that. I want to add that parameter as an argument to the Codecov Circle CI orb. Now I need to make sure that I'm passing in that parameter wherever I call the report coverage command. So here is one of those places where I'm running the Cypress orb that shows the addition of the flag parameter. So now that Circle CI is sending flag information to Codecov, I need to update the Codecov configuration to properly handle it. So first, I update the project status with something called backend. Now you can name it whatever you want, but in our case, backend represents what the backend coverage is going to look like. Now I'm going to assume that it's going to be pretty stable at 80%, obviously not 150%, and I want to tie in that flag. I want to tie that into a flag called backend, and I do that here. So it's this section. I instantiate the flag called backend, and I want you to also notice that I can also specify a path for it. And so this is really useful if you're uploading a really large coverage file that contains coverage for other directories also. This path section ensures that you're only handling the backend directory. So with all those changes, you can see that in the comment that our flag section now has three flags: backend, mobile, and desktop. So I added those in before just to show that you can add it in case you have a split between your mobile and your desktop applications. You can also make this split if you're in a monorepo and you have different projects. But this also pulls through into the status checks. So you'll see that before we only had two status checks for the patch and the project coverage. And now you see that flags also have their own status check. So again, this just makes sure that you have the coverage you need in all the different parts of the project that are important to you.
Right. Well, I'm a simple person, so I did not keep the separate flags. I just combined them. And like you saw that from 97, I dropped by 2%. So where were 5%? Well, I have to now look at the edge cases. I have to look at the source file, see the red lines. And for example, in my API, I can see this get username root that's never been tested by my end-to-end test. And now I have to make a choice. What kind of test is best at reaching that line? I can write an end-to-end test probably, right? That does everything for UI. Or I could write an API test and just directly hit that particular API endpoint to make sure that I reach those lines and it behaves as expected. So you can write Cypress API test. You just use request command. In this case, we grab authenticated user. We hit that endpoint. We look at the response, make sure it has the properties that we expect it to have. We run the test. And because there is no site visit, we don't see anything in the iframe, but we see the command log still is captured in our video. And then we can write more API tests to cover all the lines that we missed in our API, all the edge cases. And that pull request increases the code coverage by 4%. So we have 99. Okay, still not 100. Very disappointing. Again, go back to the report, right, and look at the red lines and see why we miss them. In this case, it's in our components, right, the front-end code. We can see that some of the lines, they render different component depending on the resolution. So we have this small screen breakpoint. We use media query, and we render different UI on the desktop versus mobile resolution. So what can we do to hit the lines that we missed? We have to run our UI test in a desktop resolution and in mobile resolution to make sure that the users on both devices can actually use our app and nothing is covered, nothing is off screen, and so on. So the way we wrote our CI config was, well, we have our API tests, right? They just run some specs in the API subfolder. We also have our desktop UI tests. That's our standard. That's what we had before. And then we run the same UI test, but we actually set a config to the viewport of a mobile device. So when all the tests run, we actually run on a smaller screen, a smaller viewport. And our CI run now installs everything and then runs 3 jobs in parallel, and mobile tests and the desktop test, they run on 2 machines each and parallelize everything. And again, the beautiful thing, we don't have to think how to combine all these separate partial coverage reports. Codecov as a service combines this for us. So we get an increase in coverage. And we can see where the increase came, right? All those files, all the components now increase by a few percentages because now we hit both resolutions. Great, almost there, almost, right? Now, if we look at the report, there is one file with one line that still is not covered. So we can look at that line, right? And now we hunt, why is this not covered? And you can see Istanbul ignore next. Someone attempted to hide part of this line from code coverage report. If you see Istanbul ignore next, right? It tells the code coverage service to not instrument, so it will be completely, hidden from the code coverage numbers. But now look at that code, right? When does that message run? It runs when other parts of our code have an error, right? You're trying to load, you hit a failure, you execute set message. So this tells me that we are not testing the failures, right? We never actually had a test that failed to load data and then handled it. And we never confirm that set message runs and does everything. So in this case, if you want to reach that line, we have to write a test, right? In this case, you can see that I'm intercepting that request and I'm forcing network error to be true. So that simulates a network problem, right? When the load fails and when I confirm that the error message shows up. So this is how it looks. So I confirm it, that's the test. I open that report, right? After I'm running just this one test locally, I confirm that I actually hit that line, right? You can see that it actually has been executed twice. I know that my test reaches that edge case. And then I commit open pull request, and it runs all the tests, including my new test, and it increases it by one line, and I'm hitting 100%. Not 150, but good enough. So my advice here is it's very easy to ignore parts of your code coverage, right? If it's hard to reach, right? Sometimes those regions could be ignored for valid reasons. So for example, in my backend, I'm only exposing the endpoint to return code coverage if I'm running during end-to-end testing, right? So I can ignore the else branch in the if condition. So it's valid. If I look at another one, well, we adding an endpoint to set the test date in our backend. Again, it's only going to be valid during testing. So it's a valid exception. But if you look at other ones, right, the ones we're ignoring, I think this is not a very best code ignore, right? Because in this case, we actually not checking how our authentication behaves, right? We probably should remove this ignore and actually write an API test to make sure the user is unauthorized is displayed. We can't just paper over this. So make sure that once in a while, go back to the code coverage exceptions, right? The things that you're not covering, because those are blind spots for your code coverage report. And make sure you ignore them for the right reason, and not because it was difficult to write an end-to-end or API or unit test. So before we continue, right, and before we kind of go to conclusions and go to Q&A, I had one last question, right? I remember the 60% were not using code coverage, right, from the first poll. Do you think we showed how code coverage could be, I guess, computed, collected? And maybe you want to start using it to kind of drive your test writing, right? Okay, Tom, what do you think? Have we convinced you, at least?
Right, like that's the key part. If a lot of people were like, "Oh, this webinar really didn't convince us," then maybe we weren't doing a good enough job.
Yeah, and
I think
we'd be fired, right? Obviously.
Probably new job role, new job title.
Yes. But I have to tell you honestly, right? I collected code coverage and measured it and used it to drive my development before coming to Cypress. And I think it's a great tool, right? And when I'm writing end-to-end tests, I'm not looking at coverage per se, right? I'm only looking at the end, kind of trying to see, did I miss anything? Writing end-to-end tests because they exercise the whole application increases the code coverage really, really quickly. All right. So you don't have to think about, reaching that particular line until you really, really get like towards 90%. Right. So it's not as difficult as you might think to get code coverage information, to see the reports, to incorporate them in your pull request. So I hope, you try doing this. And if you hit problems, especially in Cypress plugin or something, just let us know, open an issue, and we'll look at that.
Same on the Codecov side, of course.
Exactly. So my kind of conclusion is that try to introduce code coverage as a metric early, right? Because you will see if you're adding features without adding tests, you will see that you are dropping code coverage accidentally during refactoring, right? Maybe you will see that adding more tests will not actually do much because you already covered those tests. And don't worry about code coverage at all, right? Make sure the number goes up so you're not accidentally dropping things. But writing end-to-end tests that go through the whole flow will naturally increase the code coverage, especially in the beginning. Like the first couple of tests that log in, go through the user story, and then log out will cover so much of your application by default.
Yeah, and from the code coverage side, make sure that you track your code coverage, and that will really help you prevent yourself from writing poorly tested code changes. And so you can use Codecov to monitor whether or not code changes will actually pass or fail based on how high you set your standard. In this case, it could be 150%.
Now maybe I should aim higher now.
Yeah.
I look at code coverage report at the end, right? Not even as like a number, not a single number at least, but as a map. And that map will have like white blank spots, like unknown things you're not sure will actually work because you never tested them. So just look at those spots and travel there, right? Write tests that reach that destination, like those hard to reach places. It could be end-to-end test, it could be unit test, it could be API test. But at some point, you'll fill all the map. So Tom, are we ready to answer a couple of questions?
Oh, we're so ready.
Excellent. Maybe pick one, the one that you find interesting.
Ooh, well, let's see. There's so many good ones. Well, let's see. Do you recommend having the end-to-end test in the same repo as the application code repo? I think this one's Gleb, you got that?
I think yes, because then you can keep them in sync, and every commit and every pull request will have updated tests and code together, right? You can start with your tests in a separate repo, but it will be hard to keep them in sync. Another thing, you want to run your tests against instrumented code. If your code is somewhere else, deployed to staging environment, it's hard to instrument it after that, right? Or you'll have to deploy instrumented code to run tests and get code coverage. So I suggest keep them in the same repo so it's easier.
Should we go down the list?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? How would you describe the difference of unit test and an end-to-end test, like what Cypress does? Does coverage work for both?
So for us, yes. So unit test, you exercise a single function, right? End-to-end, you visit a page and then like operate on the page. Cypress can do both, and it combines both code coverage reports into one, behind the scenes, so there is no difference. The only thing that it cannot do is run node unit tests. But what you can do is use some other unit test runner like Jest, Ava, Mocha, instrument those tests, like Jest has it built in. You'll get a separate code coverage report and send both to Codecov, and it will combine them for you.
Yep, that's exactly what I would have said from that perspective. So it doesn't really matter like what you're using. If you send the report up to Codecov, we'll deal with the challenges of merging them all together to get you that number that you're looking for.
Tom, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sure. How would you map code coverage with feature coverage? That is, how would you ensure a feature is properly tested based on code coverage? Okay, so the one thing to always be sure of is that code coverage is a tool, inevitably, right? And it is never necessarily a mainstay for how good your tests are. Good tests are far more important than just having a good coverage number. And so with that in mind, how do you ensure that a feature is properly tested? You as a developer, you can use code coverage to say, hey, like 100% of my code is actually being tested. But that's not necessarily to say that you've actually written good tests for it. I would say like writing a phenomenal end-to-end test using Cypress is a really great place to start. That way you're able to see what that feature is going to do for an end user that will inevitably be using your product.
I agree, right? End-to-end test kind of confirms that the story is correct from like your product perspective. And then it will cover some code in your implementation. And then the code coverage will tell you, oh, you forgot about this else statement, maybe your error handling path. And in that case, you'll say, oh yeah, my test never exercised what happens if there's an error, the input or in the network and so on. So I'll add another test. And so you'll actually do feature tests by looking at the code coverage numbers.
Yeah. Can you skip the code that you cannot touch with Cypress so it would not show in the final report? I think this one is probably for us. So the answer is sort of. And it's sort of because there are ways to ignore particular files. So maybe there's the case where you don't care about coverage on your actual test files being run, which does happen. You can add a section in the Codecov configuration to do that. Specifically, I don't know if there is a way to say, hey, this particular line is a line that I don't care about and I don't need coverage for it. Excuse me. That's something we can bring back to our product team because I think it is an interesting use case.
So the one thing I have to say that I use Istanbul to instrument. It's kind of like the tool for instrumenting JavaScript code. And there you can ignore the whole file, a function, a single statement, or a branch of an if statement. Like those Istanbul ignore next that I showed and say, be careful, right? Don't ignore just because you want to ignore and get 100%. That's how you do it in JavaScript code. And then those lines will completely be skipped from your report and they'll be appear as a comment pretty much lines in the Codecov report as well. So that's how you can skip it. Just make sure you're skipping for the right reason, I want to say. I think, yeah, go ahead.
No. Yeah, I think this one's for us. How could we measure coverage if the automated tests are in a different repository than the apps repository? I think we don't come across this situation very frequently. And so I think the solutions that we have found are very case by case. If this is something that you're really struggling with, definitely hit us up. I'm Tom at Codecov.io. You can also hit us on our community boards or to codecov.io/support until we get a really great understanding of what this would look like for a significant amount of users.
Yeah. The next one I think is good for you, Tom, right? What happens if you have PHP backend, right? Like, I don't know what to do.
So you can use things like PHP unit to collect coverage, and effectively it runs the same way. So if you're using Circle CI or GitHub Actions or whatnot, you can use our bash uploader, which is just a one-line bash script to upload the result of that coverage run to Codecov. And as Gleb and I mentioned before, Codecov will just seamlessly merge those reports together so you have that view all as one number. Now, also, as I also mentioned, we also have flags. So if you're curious about I really care that my PHP code is really well tested, you can use a flag to separate out your PHP coverage from other code that you might be running.
Another question. So what backend languages do you support for code coverage?
If you name it, we probably support it.
Visual Basic.
Okay, fair
gotcha.
But yeah, if you use Go or PHP or Ruby or Python or Node or really anything else, Perl, Bash, we probably support it.
This one, right? So imagine you produce multiple code coverage reports, right? One from PHP unit and one from Cypress. So each one can be sent to Codecov, right? Maybe with different flags, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm not sure if this question is more asking what now that I have these multiple coverage reports, how do I get them into Codecov? Or if the question is more like, oh, what do I do with this now that I have that information in Codecov? So the first, it's just use the batch uploader or one of our other uploaders to get that coverage up to Codecov. We'll deal with merging it all together. But once it's up on Codecov, you can also, one of the really cool things that you can do about flags is if you go into the UI and you go into a particular file, you can toggle on and off the different flags to see, oh, this particular run, maybe it's a Windows run or a Linux run or an iPhone run. This is what happens when I run those tests in that particular environment.
Exactly. So we answered that. I'm just quickly looking at the list of questions because we have 20 more questions. And maybe this one, right? You as a professional, do you look at, let's say you have 3 different code coverage reports, right? Unit, API, end-to-end. Do you look at them separately? You want to look at them together? What would you recommend?
I usually look at them together. I think inevitably, as a developer, what I care most about is, did the code that I write get tested? Right. And if I'm a full stack developer and I'm writing backend code, I'm writing front end code, then I'm not going to care so much about, oh, great, like what happened in this particular coverage report. At the end of the day, I want to say, did the feature that I write actually do the things or have the test run on top of them?
I want to really quickly explain this one. How do you do code coverage for API tests? Just like I've shown during this presentation, you instrument the backend and you write API tests. You don't have to use Cypress, but Cypress gives you code coverage report right away. So,
if you actually go to that repository that Gleb wrote, it's right there. It was really easy to instrument flags on top of that. So.
Yeah. And I have to say, we'll send the recording of this webinar to everyone. We'll include the video link and the link to the slides and the link to the repository, and the slides have the link as well. Okay, kind of a question to fight over, right? Someone comes to you and says, Tom, code coverage is a vanity metric. Do you punch them or do you answer them?
Punch them, obviously. No, we hear this all the time, and we actually discuss this a lot because, I know a lot of developers say, oh, 100% code coverage isn't worth it because then you're just adding a target and you're just trying to game the system. And the answer to that is, well, yeah, of course. If inevitably, if you set an arbitrary target that doesn't match with what you were trying to do, an organization is trying to do, then it's going to be a vanity metric. But at the end of the day, and I mentioned this before, really high quality testing is far more superior to anything else you can do. Really good tests will really help drive good code coverage. If you don't know what is not being tested, that's where code coverage is really useful. It's, again, a tool in your developer work blocks. You can use a hammer to do things that a hammer is not supposed to do and say, hey, this doesn't work at all.
Absolutely. I don't think it's vanity metric at all.
150 or nothing.
Exactly. Can I ask you, so we use Circle CI. You briefly said there is a bash uploader. GitHub Actions, I assume, are the same, right? Just bash upload, create report, and off you go.
Yeah, we actually have a Codecov action that you can use. It's fully compatible with what our bash uploader does. So that's a little bit more comfortable. Feel free to use that. It actually acts as a wrapper on top of our bash uploader. So everything, it's turtles all the way down. In our case, it's the bash uploader.
This is kind of interesting question, right? And this is an advance, right? So we kind of look at the report, but we just see the count of lines covered. We don't know which test covered which particular line, right? Do you have an opinion on tracing back which tests run the source line? Because then you can just run those tests if you change that line. So maybe like using the coverage report. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we don't have a general strategy for this because this is something that, as a developer who, when you write a test, this would be amazing to have. So we don't have general strategy. It's something that we would love to see in the developer ecosystem for sure, without a doubt. Because being able to say, oh, like this is the line that dealt with it, is incredibly useful.
I have to say that I have a branch and pull request for Cypress code coverage plugin that actually tracks each test code coverage separately. So we could do that. We just didn't have time to kind of demonstrate the value. But it's pretty easy to do when you are running, when you control the test runner and you have access to everything after each test.
Of course.
Why don't we answer maybe one more question, because we're almost out of time. And I'll pick the one, right? When should you start collecting code coverage? Right away or later?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I'm going to say, obviously, right away, the moment you drop a new project. But more seriously, I think that Codecov often shows itself in a lot of the boilerplate or the cookie cutter repositories that are out there. It's very easy to get it all instrumented. I know, Gleb, you and I both think that getting a CI up and running as quickly as possible is one of the most important things. After that, next is, testing and code coverage. Because you don't want to have to instrument this later on when you're not really sure what's going to happen. You might as well have it from the beginning and understand how your tests are getting run. Are you writing good tests, and is your code actually working as you expect to? Especially with how easy it is to write end-to-end tests with Cypress. I was doing this like last week, and I was like, wow, it's so simple. To me, it's like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you do something like that?
I appreciate it. I say you should do continuous integration from very beginning. You might as well, after you set up continuous integration, set up code coverage. It's the easiest time to do it. Well, we're almost out of time. Tom, I want to thank you so much for working on the slides, doing the work. Everyone can find the slides online. If they need more information about Codecov, where should they go, Tom?
If you need more information, you can go to Codecov.io. We put a list on documentation for really common examples of what people like to do with their configuration file. But Gleb, this has been so much fun. From the very beginning, when we first started talking about this webinar, thank you so much for all of your hard work, for bringing this all together. Magnolia, you as well.
Well, thank you, Tom. And thank you to everyone listening and watching this webinar. We'll send the recording as it comes out. And happy testing, and stay healthy.